So this first talk then is it worth doing measurement? In preparation for the talk, I decided to go and look back at some historical e-commerce successes from quite a long way back. And what I was really reminded of when I did that was that the really successful e-commerce businesses at the beginning really found a product or a service, and they found a way of selling it and a way of marketing it that was really, really simple. They weren't really complicated omni-channel or cross-channel businesses, and they didn't actually play in all of the different marketing channels that were available. They basically found an opportunity, they had something to sell, they built a website that they found kind of worked, and then they tended to focus on one type of marketing activity. So in travel, people got very, very wrapped up in search because they saw that search was very important for finding holidays and hotels. And so pretty much all travel businesses did was spend their whole lives just doing natural search optimization and doing PPC, working out what they could afford to bid on different hotel names and different resorts or destinations. People who wanted leads, so if you were selling cosmetic surgery or eye correction, all they wanted was leads. So what they got polarized on was affiliate marketing. All they wanted to do was buy on a kind of CPA basis, and they kind of didn't really do anything else. All they did was they just gave their big campaigns to affiliates, and then they basically just said, you do anything you can to generate leads, and we'll just pay on a CPA basis. And then on the even more extreme examples were anybody trying to sell Viagra or sell dodgy loans, basically just used to email everybody they could possibly email. So most of these businesses ended up just being very, very simple and just doing whatever the activity was that they found worked. They just did absolutely more and more of it. And I don't think it's a particularly clever thing to observe, but that's obviously changed now. Successful online and e-commerce businesses now are a lot more complicated. They combine online with offline. It's all about participating in things like marketplaces and other ways of distributing the product you've got to sell. It's about participating in lots and lots of different marketing channels. And people understand that it's kind of the blend of activities that you do which makes you successful. It's very rare now that there's a successful business that just does one thing like absolutely relentlessly. So it's a big shift in the kind of businesses that used to succeed to now. And it's actually very different companies. So a lot of the businesses that were very successful very early on are actually now not, they don't even exist, or they've kind of faded away, have been taken over. And a lot of historically traditional businesses have kind of moved into the online space, and they've actually, in many cases, have found to be better at making this shift. I think that we're in the middle of another shift again. It's a slightly more subtle one, but it's really based on the idea that really sort of successful multi-channel or omni-channel businesses are now discovering that it's no longer enough just to do lots of marketing and to have lots of channels. You now need to start actually measuring the performance of your business as a whole. So it's no longer sufficient to just take each individual channel, whether it's a sales channel or a marketing channel, and just measure it in a silo. It's now the key to being successful is to actually analyze, understand, measure the performance of all of your activities, but recognizing that they're part of quite a complicated system where there are relationships and dependencies between the activities you do. And that idea of joining it all up is what we often refer to as kind of measuring or joining the dots. So in this talk, really all I'm going to say is let's forget how complicated it is. We accept it's difficult. Let's forget all the technology. Let's just work out whether it's actually worth doing at all. I'm not really quite sure of what this slide was meant to mean, but it was meant to represent the modern shopper and the challenges. But it looks like it's just a slightly odd annotation of a woman's body. So we'll forget that one. I'm not even going to go there. Okay, so the first thing I'm saying is, what is driving this complexity? Why is it so much more difficult now? Well, the demand is really from the consumer, and our modern consumer this is meant to be our modern consumer, has very, very high expectations from their shopping experience. It's no longer something that they do painfully. It's something that they consider the kind of overall online, offline, multi-channel shopping experience to be like people used to go shopping for some sort of pleasure. So they have got very high expectations. They are quick to respond to good and bad experiences. So things that work well, they respond to. And they move very, very quickly. So if they're on the web, they consume lots and lots of advertising. They consume lots and lots of marketing stuff very quickly. They move very quickly between sites. They're no longer satisfied by the idea of just finding something cheap that they can get delivered quickly. Now, the most obvious thing, and I'm not going to bore everybody by saying how many different channels there are for marketing, but this is meant to represent the fact that there are loads and loads of things from social media, display, search, all the usual gubbins, and then obviously offline there's TV and display and so on. But I guess the point that I'd make is not only are there even more channels now, but the thing is that the channels have become a lot more refined. So if we take the example of display, it used to be thought of as something that was about kind of brand building, and it tended to be done by very big brands who it was thought of as something they could afford to do. Whereas a smaller brand that really wanted direct response, people would kind of say, well, kind of display is not really for that. In reality, though, now it's become completely different. Things like retargeting and the idea of really heavily targeted display adverts based on social media profiles and that kind of thing has meant that suddenly display has actually got a very specific purpose at a particular point in the kind of sales funnel. And so it's not only something that lots of brands are beginning to do now, but they do it with a real understanding of what the actual purpose is. So I guess that I feel that that's happened in lots of the channels, and what that's meant is that we've now got such a refined view of the way that people progress down the purchase funnel that the reason why just doing one activity just doesn't work is because it only meets that consumer at one part of their stage of making a buying decision. And consumers, we're now beginning to understand, to be successful with them, is we now need to meet them as they progress down that purchase funnel. And there isn't a channel that meets all of the consumers at all points. So that's why we have to participate in a lot more channels. And then, of course, we've got the choices of where they actually buy. And this is meant to represent the fact that they can visit stores, they can use call centres, they use lots of devices, and then they use their computer. But I guess the point here is that it used to be that people like my mum would say, oh, I never buy online. You know, I might look a bit, but I never buy. And then there'd be other people who'd say, oh, no, I always buy everything online. I just hate shopping. But the reality is now is that the modern consumer just does exactly what they want when it suits them. And I've got some examples of that. And it really isn't a very good plan now to actually just say, I'm only interested in people who shop online, or I'm only interested in people who shop offline, because those people, everybody to some extent participates in all of the channels. So that's all very well me saying this. These are kind of ideas. I've just got some quick data which I hope sort of illustrates that might actually be true, the ideas that I've come up with. So all we've done here is for a fixed set of multi-brand sites, which we on and offline combined sites that we actually track. This is looking at the website, the number of visits before somebody actually converts. And over the last 5 years, the number of visits leading up to a conversion for this group has increased from about 2.75 all the way up to almost 10. So this isn't that people are less decisive, it's just that they are quite happy to make lots of visits, and they'll look and they'll move very quickly before they actually make the decision to buy. So I think that that's meant to illustrate this idea that they're more quick and they're more nimble about the way they navigate. The next one is trying to illustrate the number of marketing channels. So we've looked at this same group of retailers and we've tried to see how many different marketing channels, and in this particular case, the marketing channels are things that brought them to the website. How many different marketing channels contributed in their path to conversion? And as recently as 2010, that was only just over 1. So most people, however they found the site the first time, they probably kept coming back using the same channel. whereas now we see that it's, in this particular group of retailers, actually over 3 channels contribute to the journey. Now, that may be exaggerating the situation a little bit because these guys are typically doing display now, whereas they probably didn't do display back there. But on the other hand, I think it does illustrate that even if we excluded display, they're still responding to multiple different channels in their journey to purchase. It's harder to make the argument about devices because 5 years ago, most people didn't have multiple devices, and certainly we didn't have the technology to actually join them up. So this is more a statistic about now, and this will vary for quite a lot of different retailers based on a whole mass of issues. But on a small group of retailers that we've got that actually track across devices with their online experience, we're now seeing that 40% of the customers who buy, somewhere in their path to conversion, they've used more than one device. And the mechanism that we've got for joining devices means that the picture grows over time as we're able to join together devices. So the reality is probably that it's even higher than 40%. But obviously we don't know that because that's an evolving figure. But I mean, I think this hopefully gives evidence behind my idea that people really are using lots of devices. This is another interesting bit of behavioural study. The Guardian, of all people, I'm not sure how much we should trust them for this kind of analysis, but what they did was over the Christmas period, they actually plotted the amount of rainfall that happened in London during that period. And they also plotted for various brands that had in-store but also very important websites, and they plotted the different sales in those 2 channels against the rainfall. And what they just saw was that the more it rained, the more people shopped online, and the less it rained, the more people actually went into shops. So no great surprises there. But on the other hand, it does illustrate that by actually having a multi-channel strategy, some of these brands have actually almost isolated themselves from the problems of weather. But maybe that's not that impressive. But it could mean that they actually start to plan the way that their business works based on understanding what the weather is. I don't know whether there really is an advantage. But I guess the point is that it's just showing that our customer is influenced by things which are way outside our control, like the weather. So the challenge then, it's kind of time for a Rubik's Cube analogy. The challenge is that in the old days then, I'm saying that when you really had one sales channel and you were predominantly using 1 or 2 marketing channels, it was a little bit like trying to solve one face of the Rubik's Cube, because although you knew that things that you did had an impact on other stuff, the other stuff was not that important to you. You were just very focused on 1 or 2 very simple things. But once you actually start getting into really proper multi-channel retail, where you've got dozens of marketing activities, and you're also worrying about at least 2 or 3 actual sales channels, suddenly the challenge becomes more like a proper Rubik's Cube, where when you make an adjustment to solve one problem, it has all kinds of effects on other things which you weren't necessarily trying to change. And that's why the puzzle's really difficult, because if you don't have any systematic way for actually measuring and actually progressing towards the solution, all you end up doing is solving one thing at a time and messing up the stuff that you've previously done. So it's meant to be an analogy which illustrates that because of this proliferation of channels and proliferation of sales channels, it really is a challenge now that you can't just use intuition and fiddling around. You've actually got to have a systematic way of actually measuring how you're progressing in your development of your solution. I'm not quite sure whether there's whether the Rubik's Cube analogy really works, but it seemed quite good at the time.
I think it's slightly flawed, because when you perform one action, it generally has a positive effect on other channels rather than messing them up. The complication analogy is useful.
Plus you couldn't think of a better one. Yeah. So now we get down to the question of, is it worth it? I've kind of got 2 sections of is it worth it. The first one is really just to say, is there any evidence that the people who are actually doing this kind of joined up view are actually doing better? And then the second one is to say, what is it they're doing? So in terms of what is it worth doing, first of all, KPMG did a study with the British Retail Consortium after Christmas. And it's clearly a big report, but I've pulled out some lines which suit my argument. But what they said was that the stores that excel online had absolutely bumper Christmases, and those without a multi-channel strategy struggled. So I guess the point that I'm really trying to make is that sometimes when we talk about this joined-up world, people kind of say, well, that might be the case in the future. We've got time to make a decision whether we do it or not. But I guess this was a report about what happened in the Christmas that's just gone. And one of the highlights of what they were saying was there was a direct correlation between the brands that had multi-channel strategies and were joining everything up and treating it as an on and offline business as one. They were the ones that were successful. And the second point was that where they saw growth, and there wasn't always growth, but where they saw growth, it was in this kind of multi-channel area rather than in that they'd got a better store or they got a better website. So at the very high level, hopefully that suggests that it's a good idea. John Lewis was highlighted as being a real success story over Christmas. And 7% overall sales growth, but still 28% growth in their online. So an enormous business like John Lewis where, an improvement of 2 or 3% really means that they, that is an impressive, huge numbers type growth. But online, they're still getting growth of 28%. Now, the thing that they did, which was really interesting, was this idea of click and collect, which they've done for a long time, but they rolled it out to their Waitrose stores. So they're an enormous network of Waitrose stores to start doing collect from. And that drove a 70% growth. Now, I suppose that it sounds like a simple thing to do, but there's actually really quite a lot of complicated logistics and reporting and all sorts of things to make that happen. Because although it's part of the same group, it's a slightly different business, Waitrose from John Lewis. So a huge investment in actually joining the dots and having reporting to understand how it's working. And they've got 70% growth out of it. So it feels, as an outsider, it feels like that was a really valuable thing for them to be doing. To back that up, a third of their customers who did click and collect also ended up buying stuff in store. Now, it's difficult to say whether they just bought a Mars bar at the checkout or whether they actually bought something that was of significance. But again, as part of this kind of joined up view of the world, it's an amazing thing if you could start saying that not only was it more convenient for them to buy, but there was potential for us to upsell when they got to the store, and we knew what they'd bought, so there was potential for all sorts of upsell to go on. So again, an impressive thing which is about joining the dots rather than just having the channel individually working well. The last one is a more general point, but interiors and furniture didn't do very well over Christmas online. But again, John Lewis actually did very well over the Christmas period on that. And in their report, in their end of sort of Christmas statement, they credited the fact that they thought that they had dealt with the whole issue of browsing online and browsing in store and then buying in the other channels. They'd kind of welcomed that. Whereas quite a lot of other companies were desperately trying to, once you got people online, it was all about trying to make them buy online and not let them sort of think they could go to a store. And when they're in store, it was all about trying to say you couldn't buy quite the same thing online. So John Lewis kind of credited the idea that they welcomed the idea of people bouncing between the two. They credited as being part of their success. House of Fraser, a big client of ours. Similarly, they had a very, very big they had a very good Christmas. Their overall sales were up 7.3, but even bigger, 58% growth online. I think really that's because they came to online later than some of the other big department stores, but they're catching up fast. One of the big areas for them is this idea of buy and collect stores, and Peter's going to talk about that. But they've actually opened stores where they don't sell any product. All you can do is collect stuff that you've ordered online, and you can go onto machines and actually look at other stock they've got. And they've got a few examples of items within the store, but you can't actually buy them. So the idea is that they can create far smaller retail units, which actually complement their multi-channel business. So an example of something that they're being quite innovative on. I don't think that necessarily it's proved to be a big winner yet, But on the other hand, it's demonstrating innovation in this area.
They've also rolled out iPads within stores, so you can go shopping in a store as normal, but not actually buy anything in the store. Buy it for delivery for home at a later date. So remove what used to be considered the inconvenience of delivery is now a convenience. You don't have to carry your shopping.
Argos didn't do so well over Christmas, despite being a customer of ours, but I don't think it was us that was the problem. But in fact, their online sales grew by 46%. Mobile commerce was up massively for them, so people are actually using mobiles to make orders, and the mobile represents 20% of their total online sales now. So that's really, really quite significant. Again, click and collect was a big part. But I think the last one is the most interesting one, the eBay partnership. So I guess if you think about it, for Argos, it feels like it makes sense for them to want to do a partnership with eBay because, Argos is thought of as a kind of old Luddite, high street, unglamorous business. You could see why they would want to go out their way to kind of be associated with eBay. But in actual fact, this is a partnership which was driven by eBay, who wanted exposure to having lots of physical places to do click and collect from. So it just highlights the fact that eBay, that's one of the most sort of high-profile, massively successful marketplaces in the world, ended up doing a local partnership with a very unglamorous store in the UK because they felt they needed presence on the high street for doing things like click and collect and for doing physical promotions. So even these pure play marketplaces online are actually now trying to get themselves involved with high street and physical stores. It's more of the same kind of stuff, really, so I'm going to skip through this quite quickly. Tesco's, on their actual Christmas statement, described it being their multi-channel Christmas, so they themselves were trying to promote the idea that was very big. 70% of their fashion orders were click and collect for their FF brand. That seems incredible. But I think the last one is the most interesting stat for me, was that they said that 40% of their grocery orders were created on multiple devices. So what they're saying is that a family or a household will have an account, and not only will one person be placing things in the basket, but multiple people within that family or within that household would be placing things in the basket and building up the basket, which is then purchased on a kind of once-a-week basis. Now, as a dad, that seems like an absolute nightmare. but presumably if you're Tesco's, and that really is true, it's hugely exciting because you've got this other way of encouraging people to shop. So although Tesco's didn't have a massive online Christmas, I think the fact that they have developed this way of their sort of system for building up grocery orders, you could see that they can utilise that to build out their kind of online multi-channel proposition.
Just a brief comment on that. I actually stopped shopping at Sainsbury's and went to Tesco's because it's far easier with Tesco's. You walk around, it's like getting to your phone and it's multiple hits. Whereas Sainsbury's make it far too difficult to use a mobile device to just on the go and
That's exactly what they thought they were trying to do when they did it. But I mean, I must say that I found that 40% number incredible, but I mean, that's maybe it is bang on. Another one here, and this is just this is a bit like the Guardian example. John Lewis, again, gave results over the Christmas period, week by week, and there was this week leading up to the 8th of February, which was the week where there was absolutely catastrophic rain everywhere in the UK, and that 50% of their stores were down year on year from the year before. But then that same week, online sales were up by 17.7%, and for that week they posted an overall 3.3% sales rise. So they have actually successfully, seemingly isolated themselves from the effects of the weather. So that does actually seem like a massive shift, because otherwise they would have likely just been down on the week. And when you talk to retailers, they always say that you never catch up. It's like, it's not that the sales will happen the following week. Those are just sales that won't happen, and therefore you will never catch those up. So you can see that these multi-channel retailers have now got a way of isolating themselves from even things like the weather, which somebody who's a pure one-channel player doesn't actually have. So hopefully that's some evidence that there is correlation between people who are joined up and doing multi-channel and understanding it are actually the successful ones. What I'm going to try and do now is suggest what it is that they do differently. What they do better, I've broken down into 4 areas. The first thing is they budget plan better, so they know where to spend their marketing dollars, or pounds hopefully. Channel optimization, they have a better view of how to optimize. Performance media is, I'm really talking about affiliates, so they have the opportunity to do more creative stuff around incentivizing affiliates and partners. And then finally, trading analytics is this idea that having built this amazing database which consolidates all this information from all their different sales and marketing channels, it doesn't take much for that to be extended from being a marketing view into a kind of trading view, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So firstly, budgeting. Budgeting is a hugely complicated thing that a business does, generally on a kind of annual basis, to work out where they're actually going to spend their marketing money. And their objective and what they're trying to achieve is very particular to an individual business. So I'm not going to try and sort of describe all the issues that are involved, but in our experience, when we talk to retailers that we work with, the most common approach that they have to planning their budget is to look at what they did last year and to pretty much start with what they did last year, and then to say, what were the things which we felt worked quite well, and they do a bit more of that, and then what are the things which we felt didn't really work very well, and they do a little bit less of that. But that is fundamentally the process that they go through. So they start with most of the decisions having been made just based on what they did last year. Now, it may be that your business is different or it's more sophisticated, but I've come across very few companies there where they've got a strategy which goes very much beyond that. But if you have joined the dots of all of your marketing channels and all of your sales channels, you have the opportunity to start that process in a completely different way. Now, whether you go back to starting from a blank sheet of paper and just saying, what should we be doing based on the performance, I'm not necessarily sure that that's realistic. You inevitably have to look at what you were doing last year a bit, and it's not realistic to replan all of your budgets every single year completely from scratch. But on the other hand, these really well-measured, really well-monitored businesses have the opportunity to at least test the assumptions and test the things that they were doing the year before and have a real understanding of being able to say, the value of this activity was generating these sales in these particular channels. So you can just see that this is the area where there's a huge amount of opportunity, if you are measuring things properly, to make a massive amount of difference. And the thing that adds to that is we're often asked the question of, what's the ROI on building a measurement solution? So how much money can I expect to actually save, or how much more money can I actually make? And it's a really difficult question to answer. But the thing that's quite interesting is people believe it when we say things like, on average, we can move 25% of your budget from things which we see as not working in the optimal way to things which we see that there is an opportunity to add them into other activities that work better, and there is capacity to spend more money in those channels. And they find that quite believable. But the reality is, when we move, say, 10% of budget in that way, if it really does come from a channel that doesn't work and goes into a channel that does work, it actually sort of doubles up the effect because you make a saving on one hand and then you're investing in something that works even better on the other. So even relatively small shifts in budget allocation can have a really big effect on the businesses. So I think quite often people get very polarized on having measurement solutions to do very granular type optimization of marketing. But a lot of the time, the opportunity is missed to really stand back and say, am I spending the right amount of money in these channels? Or am I at least challenging what we've done historically based on an understanding of what our measurement system is telling us is and isn't working?
One of the really important factors of the budgeting process is the confidence that a good measurement platform will give you. One of the barriers to changing how budgets are split across channels is fear. It's fear that if you change something, it'll actually have a detrimental effect rather than a positive effect. The more you understand, the less fearful you are, and the more confident you are in the decisions you're making. So the bolder you'll be. And being bold will often give you the right decision and put you in the right place quicker.
I think building on that, I guess the really important point is that all the solutions that we try and build give you an ongoing way of measuring it. So the point is that when you make a change, you should be able to measure the effect of that change. So if you're confident enough to make the change and you know that you're going to be able to measure it, that should be the kind of thing that spurs you on to actually do stuff, rather than just to sit back going, oof, I know I probably ought to change something here, but it would be a lot of problems for me if I stopped doing this activity and suddenly the business started going wrong. So I guess it is very much about confidence and knowing what you're going to do to measure the impact. Just some very quick examples. With House of Fraser, we weren't actually driving their budget process. I think that would be wrong to say. But what we were doing was we were powering the budget process with understanding of what the channels did and what impact they had on the business. And a really massive change for them was that they're all about driving new customers. And they had never really used display advertising very effectively or very confidently. But based on the results of quite small, targeted display campaigns, they actually gained a confidence, which meant that they're now actually investing very heavily in display. And that's something that they did, I think, directly from being powered with better information, which gave them that confidence. Rakuten's Play.com, very different thing. We work with them really. They're very, very keen on growth. So for them, it's less about understanding ROI. It's almost as much about understanding the capacity in a channel for actually spending more money. Because there's kind of tends to be a diminishing return as you spend more on search. The effectiveness of your additional spend kind of gets less and less and less. And there's that sense with lots of channels. So the thing that they really wanted from us was not only to know what the positive effect of the different channels were, but to understand how that positive effect would change over as they spent more and more money. And for them, they actually spent a threefold increase on marketing, so a really massive shift. Just looking at what they did the year before wasn't a good guide. I'm not got a specific company that I'm going to mention here, but it's often the way that measurement's seen as a luxury that you do when you're doing really well. Or we're making enough money, we can now invest in measurement. But there are plenty of examples where businesses that are struggling, that are measured well, have the opportunity to sort of adjust things and use the controls better. If they were just guessing because they hadn't invested in measurement, cutting budgets as dangerous as sort of spending more. And in this particular example, we had a very specific goal to help them cut 25% of their marketing budget. And we did so with a very low impact on overall performance. And in some respects, it's quite a good way of looking at the whole marketing optimization problem, because to find stuff that doesn't work tends to be quite easy compared with actually finding stuff that's new and does work. So it's an interesting way to look at the whole budgeting problem, looking for wasted money rather than looking for the high performers. The next example of what these companies do better is channel optimization. And I'm going to use the example of search. So if we take PPC, lots and lots of companies have invested a huge amount of money in getting the really good staff that really understand paid search. They've then invested a whole load of money in giving them some really great technology so that they can actually look at what's going on, and they can have campaign management tools, and they can replicate campaigns very quickly, and they can be dynamic, and they integrate feeds and all sorts of stuff. So they invest heavily in it as if they're really serious. But then what they do is they then measure the performance using a very simple last click wins model. And so all that happens is the people who are really good and all the technology that's really good all ends up being focused to optimize to a model which is completely wrong, because most people will now accept that just attributing everything to the last click isn't a very good way of measuring it. So what our findings are is that these companies that measure really well, even if they don't have the best teams and the best tools, as long as those teams and tools are measured using the best way of measuring performance, they tend to get to far better performance over the long term than the people who are just optimizing to a completely wrong measure, and they're forever spending their time trying to work out how they actually bridge this sort of compromise of last click wins. So the really well-measured companies are actually spending a lot more effort on measurement rather than optimization tools and teams. But the second point is that it can't be ignored, the fact that even something like search does influence other channels and is influenced by other channels. And therefore, whilst it may not be the primary focus of, for instance, your PPC person to actually be looking at what their impact is on other channels or to look at what's influencing what they do, it's definitely worth the business actually having some understanding of that so that they understand that when they spend more in one channel, that has to be supported by spends in other channels. And that's something that we see in the well-joined up businesses that we work with. Supporting performance media, I'm not going to talk about this for too long because I've got another presentation about some work we've done on this. But it's really just saying that the whole thing about affiliates, it was meant to be, the original dream was kind of the complete alignment of the merchant and the affiliate, as in the merchant only pays when they get what they want, which is sales, and the affiliate has a way of monetizing their kind of visitors and their users. But it's really just saying that that doesn't really work because the mechanism for actually managing that relationship is basically on a last click or when cookie type basis. And the businesses that are very well set up for measurement can actually step away from that kind of cookie-based approach and actually start making affiliate payments based on their real understanding of user journeys. And I'm going to present a piece on it later. But that, for me, is becoming an important opportunity to actually use the affiliate and performance marketing channels as a way of actually growing the proportion of your budget, which can be performance-driven rather than buying media. I'll skip through this and wait until the later presentation. The last area is this idea of trading analytics. And as I said before, it's if you've got a marketing database which is full of all of your marketing activities, all of your sales information, it's very easy to add in, say, a stock feed and to add in an order processing feed and some other feeds of information about your business. To suddenly, the database, as well as being massively relevant to the marketing team and determining where they should spend their money and how they should optimize their channel, it suddenly becomes about the trading of a business. And you start being able to look at the rates that products are selling and seeing what marketing activities are actually selling those products, and then actually seeing how quickly you're going to run out of stock, and actually making decisions about marketing which are very granular about what the stock is that you want to sell and what is and isn't selling well, and actually making marketing decisions which are actually focused on selling the products that you actually need to sell. And also the buying teams on knowing what the products are that are in demand, on understanding what the implications are when a colour or a size is not available. So what we're seeing is that databases that we really built to support the marketing team are now becoming a lot more part of the information system that businesses are using for actually trading their business. So what we're seeing more and more is that we're asked to produce reports which support the kind of daily trading meeting. So people are saying, what's selling? What have we got too much of? What are we running out of? What are the ranges where we haven't got enough sizes? And rather than those decisions about what the actions are to be taken, rather than being based on kind of hunches or very disjointed views of the business, they're now being based on reports which are created from this kind of very joined up view that we're creating. So, surprise, surprise, my conclusion is that it is worth it joining up the dots. It is clearly quite a painful and complicated thing that needs to be done, but on the other hand, not only anecdotally, but also in terms of, you can see the decisions, it's easy to understand why the businesses with this joined up view are so much more successful. And I guess even, so my real conclusion is that it's more than just a kind of nice thing to have. I think it really will become the key to success, and the really good businesses are going to be the ones that are powered with the best data. And I think, you know, the fact that Amazon's known this for quite a long time has meant that they've got a big jump on everybody else. But the reality is that people are catching up now, and, you know, Amazon and those very early companies invested huge amounts of money because they were doing it so early. The technology was very expensive. Not many people really knew what they were trying to get to. So even though lots of businesses are behind, there's plenty of opportunity to catch up quickly and to actually, you know, start using this stuff to make your business a success going forward.